Driver's testing examiners. What is the worst mistake a new driver has made on a test? I was the new driver. At the time, I read about a new law where drivers could run a stop sign if the driver could see the intersection was clear. This was considered a rolling stop. I went to my test, drove a stick fluently, rolled through a four-way stop. Instructor freaked. That was a four-way stop. There's a new law to save gas. You're allowed to roll through a stop if the intersection is clear. It was past October or whatever, and it was clear, so I rolled through. Satisfied, the instructor scribbled something on his clipboard. I passed, went back to work, told the guys about the dumb instructor who didn't know about the new rolling stop law, and they said, that's not a law. They proposed it in October, and it got shot down. I can't believe he passed you. Story 2. Not the examiner, but I was involved. I was driving my regular vehicle into the parking lot of a CDL-only driver facility to renew my CDL. As I'm making a right into the lot from the public road, a semi-tractor trailer comes flying out of the lot into my right-of-way. I avoid it by pulling off into the grass. The trailer continues onto the road but crosses directly across into the parking lot opposite. I get off the grass, park properly, grab my things, and walk into the facility. I was upset, but wasn't hit, so I wasn't going to go after the guy and cause a fight. About 3 minutes later, a driver examiner walks in, screaming about this idiot who never is getting his Class A as long as I live. And whoever brought him here better not ever let him try again, and needs to go across the street to collect the vehicle and the sorry excuse for a driver. Yeah, nearly got taken out by a newbie truck driver. I wonder if he ever did pass or if she truly was able to permaban him. Story 3. Not an examiner, but there was a big panic and scrambling on the day of my road test. Apparently, a young woman completely blew past the stop sign and got T-boned by a school bus. The girl was hurt, but since it was the examiner's side, they were in critical condition last I heard. Safe to say, she failed. Story 4. My dad was an examiner for a while. Once a girl froze during the test and stopped on railroad tracks and a train was coming. Not real fast, but fast enough that it might not be able to stop. She would not hit the accelerator as she was frozen in fear, especially after the train blew its horn right into the window. My dad had to put his foot over onto her side and hit the gas to get off the tracks. You know, OP, with a story like this, I can guess why he used to be an examinator. Something like that would put me into early retirement for sure. Story 5. Not an examiner. I passed the test first time 100%. Although, when driving back into the car park of the transport department, I pulled in a little wonky. So I said, I'll fix that for you. Reversed back to straighten up, and another car started to pull out directly behind me, not noticing me, I guess. They were about to hit my car, so I stressed out and put the car in drive to move forward quickly, a little too quickly, and launched my car over the car space barrier thing. I wanted to cry then and there. He just said, okay, I'll meet you inside. I parked the car and sat there for a good minute knowing that must have made me fail. As I walked inside, I saw all the instructors standing together with him and they were all laughing at me. I passed though, so I was happy to laugh along, dying inside. Now I have a real fear of hitting those mini concrete barriers when I park. My car is just low enough to the ground that every time one of those barriers is in front of me and I see other cars have gone over it with the front of their car, I just sort of scrape along and it makes the worst noise ever and it makes me feel like the worst driver every single time. Story 6. Not an examiner, but my tester told me something I will never forget. He was driving with a girl and testing her. Here in Arizona and probably everywhere in the US, the examiner is not allowed to say anything that isn't a direction. For example, turn left. Of course, this doesn't work if the driver is a little slow. During the test, she pulls up to a stop sign. She's the first one there, but another car pulls up to the left. She waves them on, not entirely wrong, but she should have gone first. Not a huge deal. Then it happens again. Mind you, she hasn't moved through the intersection, rather another car has approached, stopped, and been waved on. There are now 1 or 2 cars behind her. Eventually, there's a large backup of honking traffic and a small trickle of cars crossing through the intersection in front of her. She finally turns to the instructor and says, "Why are they all mad at me? I have a red light." And that's the story of how a small point deduction failed someone's driving test. Story 7. Not an examiner. In excess of 25 years ago, the RTA office car park in Albury, NSW was where you started your test. There was a stop sign and solid white line at the exit from the car park. Australian rules makes this a compulsory stop. Neophytes would roll through it and thus fail before the front wheels hit the actual roadway. Story 8. My instructor. You did great, but there's a smoked joint in your cup holder, so I'm gonna have to ask you to try again another time. That's not mine. I was young once too. Don't worry, you'll pass next time. It was my mom who left her roach in the car. Story 9. Okay, not a driving test instructor, but this happened during my test. I'd just gotten a little Hyundai as my first car to take my test in, as my mom drove a massive SUV. We hadn't driven it much or anything, but we decided it would suffice. We had to drive about 45 minutes to the testing facility as we lived out in the middle of nowhere. So here I am, 16. Nervous as hell in this new car that we just got on roads I didn't recognize. My instructor had me drive on an old country road where the speed limit was 55, the fastest I'd ever driven. All was going well until I noticed smoke billowing out of the wheel well. My car was on fire. Something had bounced up into my tires and burst into flames. After the whole ordeal was over, the instructor passed me despite not completing the maneuverability part of the exam. The cool thing was that the car was totaled due to the fire, and I ended up getting another way better, non-exploding vehicle. Story 10. I passed my third time. I had no idea how good I did though. The Korean woman who tested me looked pretty tired, put her sunglasses down, told me about 2 instructions, then promptly began to doze off during the test. At one point she literally told me that I know where to go. Entirely skipped the freeway portion of my test. After pulling it, I remember I said, "Okay, we're here," and she softly muttered, "Oh, thank God. 100% pass, no mistakes." I guarantee you, she saw none of my driving. Story 11. Not an examiner. One of my friends had a pretty brutal mistake though. We live in Wisconsin and she took her test on a day where there was a bit of snow. Started the road portion of the test, pulling up to a red light with a pedestrian crossing the crosswalk. My friend started braking way too late. When she hit the brakes, the wheels just locked up and she slid into the pedestrian, knocking them up onto her hood and breaking the pedestrian's leg. She failed the test 4 more times after that, but now uses the road just like anyone else. I refuse to even ride in her car. Well, that's unnerving. I can only hope she got at least a little better. Story 12. In driver's ed, I was on my last observation. The dude got in the car and told the instructor he's colorblind, no big deal, but wait for it. And he can't turn his back/head at all to look for oncoming traffic/pedestrians/people in the other lane. Guess it was genetic because he seemed fine. He had to turn his entire body to see anything, but the driving instructor was cool with it, had to do all the looking out for the guy. I was scared though. Story 13. Not an examiner, but I managed to stall the car on top of a roundabout. Luckily it wasn't a proper test. Just my dad with a printout of the assessment rubric. It did mark the end of his attempts to teach me how to drive a manual before an automatic. He then did the sensible thing of teaching me the skills required to drive in our automatic, then put me back in the manual to learn how to do all that without having to also panic about the driving part. I don't understand why, if you have the option between a manual and an automatic, you would choose the manual first. I just see no purpose to it. Admittedly, I don't really get manual driving to begin with because, I don't know, I'm a little baby boy, so maybe that plays into it a bit. Story 14. Buddy of mine was born 6 months before me. When we were 13, he bragged continuously about how much sooner he would have his license compared to me. Anyway, I think he failed his test like, 4 times. First, he bumped the curb. Second time, I don't know what, but he lost his crap on the instructor. It was the same guy testing him and made a huge scene. Then failed 2 more times. By the time he got his license, he was only on the road for 2 weeks before me. I failed my written test once on my mock driving school test, but passed my first road test. Story 15. Towards the end of the semester during driver's ed, we were allowed to take the official driving test with our high school instructor and generally did so in pairs. I went out for my test along with a classmate. I went first and passed my test fine. My classmate gets in the driver's seat, does not disengage the parking brake, and backs out of the angled parking space the wrong way. This meant immediate failure, and the instructor literally ripped her paper test form thing in half. Felt bad, but pretty hilarious. Story 16. Not a test examiner, but on my test, I passed pretty easily, and when the instructor told me to pull over at the end of the course, she motioned toward a spot with a fire hydrant. Thinking it was a final gotcha, I said, "Well, there's a fire hydrant there, so I'll go up to the next spot." She didn't care, it wasn't a test. But as soon as I parked 3 cars up, a presumably failing testee rear-ended the car I would have been behind at around 15 kilometers an hour. No one left in an ambulance, but the instructor in that car got out rubbing his neck and the car was pretty beat up. If I didn't think my examiner was tricking me, it would have been my car. Story 17. This is kind of the opposite, me as the student, but the driving instructor grabbed my wheel on numerous occasions, and on one occasion she grabbed it and was yelling at me to turn into the left lane, which I was doing. However, I was waiting for the driver to get out of my blind spot, and she kept forcing the wheel left as I fought it right, and she only let go once the other driver honked at us. Is a driving instructor ever allowed to grab the wheel? I don't understand. Story 18. Not an examiner here. I was at the DMV a few days ago and I overheard a girl crying her eyes out. Apparently there was a pothole in the road and the examiner told her to go around it using the bike lane since there was no middle lane. She proceeded to do so, but drove the rest of the driving test in the bike lane. She was telling her parents it wasn't even her fault because the lady, quote, Told her to drive in the bike lane. Story 19. The first time I took my test, we started with maneuvers. For the life of me, probably due to nerves, I couldn't do a reverse bay park right. After about 4 minutes of watching me struggle, the instructor just said, let's leave it, eh? I did the rest of the test anyway for practice, and apparently I would have passed on it, but I failed before I even left the car park of the test center. Story 20. Not the examiner, but test taker. Honestly did pretty well my whole test and made it all the way back to the DMV. Final test was pulling into a parking spot. The DMV in my city is part of a strip mall with a restaurant directly to the left of the building with outside seating. So many open spots, and I chose the parking spot right in front of a group of people eating lunch. Rammed right into a guy in his chair that was sitting a couple of inches from the curb. Failed immediately, and the examiner lost her crap on me for a solid 5 minutes on my birthday. I wait the next month to retake the test in the next town over as it's less busy on the roads, and I felt like I couldn't show my face at the first DMV. I walk in, give my name, and immediately the examiner goes, "Oh my gosh, are you the girl who hit someone in the chair?" I was so embarrassed, but hey, thankfully, still passed. Doing something on a driving exam so bad that they tell other places about it? Yikes, OP. I think I would have just walked out, to be honest. Just like, no, that wasn't me, but I do remember I have to go feed my goldfish. Bye. Story 21. I was the examiner and was giving this kid his driving test for the second time. We're driving down a 4-lane highway. Now it's my job to make sure he knows how to safely and properly change lanes. When I looked, this kid had plenty of space. I tell him to change lanes. He swerves over without barely a glance, and at this point a car had come flying up out of nowhere. While he changes lanes and the car apparently swerves to avoid him. The next thing I see is a car flying through the air across the 4-lane and landing in someone's yard from behind us. He panicked and I kind of freaked out too. Driver was okay and the person whose yard it was freaked out, but was okay too. By some miracle, that car managed to not hit another car. Needless to say, the kid didn't pass. Again, I think he took the test 2 more times before he finally passed. Scared the hell out of me. There was also a brother and sister who nearly ended me twice in less than 20 minutes. One pulled out in front of a rollback who barely slammed on the brakes in time to not hit us, but I could count the bugs in the grill, and the other turned in front of an 18-wheeler. Good times. Good times. Story 22. Not an examiner, but I was the driver. This is also a high school course. Was driving on a back road when my teacher said, "What are you doing?" In the calmest voice. I said, "What do you mean?" Turns out my dumb butt was driving on the wrong side of the road for like a whole minute. Luckily, the road was empty or else that conversation would have ended a lot differently. Funny enough, I still got my permit at the end of the course. Story 23. We started in a neighborhood. I got in, checked my mirrors, started the car, put in drive, pulled out of parallel parking, and drove straight through a stop sign. I look at him, and he looks at me and says, "All right, your test begins now. Thanks, dude, for not failing me over my nerves." Edit. In his defense, he did tell me after the test to be watching for all road signs and signals. He also told me if I hadn't done the rest of the test perfectly, he would have failed me. Story 24. When I took my driver's test 2 weeks ago, everything was going great. My turns were pretty good, my stops weren't too hard, and I even did a decent job at parallel parking. At the very end of the test, I pulled into the parking lot of the DPS, and the instructor told me to park in one of 2 adjacent spots, one of which was right up against the curb. For some reason, even though I'm fully aware of how crap at parking I am, I decided to park in the curb spot. I completely went over it. All I could do was sigh, reverse, and try again. Thankfully, on the second try, I made it. I ended up passing too. Story 25. I quote-unquote failed my first test because my car tried to murder me. We pull out of the lot, and suddenly it sounded like my engine started racing a bit, and the car started accelerating on its own. So as we're pulling up to a red light, the guy says, "Okay, so just stop at this light," and then looks over to see me with both feet slammed down on the brake. The guy was nice and didn't actually fail me. He just rescheduled my test and told me to bring a different car next time. I guess there was some problem where the cruise control was shorting or something, and it would cause my car to constantly accelerate as if I were flooring it. It happened one other time before we got it fixed, and I was doing 55 in a 40 without touching the gas pedal. By the time I got it home, the engine was smoking. Story 26. What about the examiner making you do stupid crap? It was my 3rd time taking the test. Parallel parking is a pain in the butt, and the first intersection you come to during the test is a busy 2-way street that people speed on. I stop at the intersection and can't really find a good time to pull out. 2 cars pass and the instructor tells me how I'm holding up traffic at this point, so the next break I find in traffic, I pull out. Now, the break wasn't big. I gunned it and cut someone off. It was enough to get my heart pumping, and I was a pretty ballsy driver even when I was on my permit. A couple seconds after I completed the turn, I hear the instructor say, "Good. Story 27. I was an examiner for about a year. The worst mistake I ever encountered was a woman making a right-hand turn at a red light directly into oncoming traffic. She finally noticed she was about to murder both of us, so she decided to slam on her brakes in traffic as cars swerved not to hit her. In the meantime, I'm yelling, "Go!" and pointing for her to continue driving. I had her pull over to the side of the road and I drove her car back to the testing site. I jumped out of the car and handed her a list of driving schools, and I told her not to come back until she knew how to drive, because she was a hazard to herself and everyone else on the road. I only lasted a few more months than that. My life is worth more than $15 an hour. Edit. In some states, new drivers over 18 only need to pass the written and road test. They don't need proof of hours behind the wheel like minors. The over 18 testers were the worst drivers, hands down. I'd rather be in a car with a minor who's gone through driver's ed any day. Story 28. Not an examiner, but I have a story about a weird instructor. I went for my license when I was 17. I'd also been driving under my mom's supervision since I was 10, middle of nowhere, nobody else around. So I had a decent grasp of how to handle a vehicle by the time I was 17. The driver instructor kept complimenting I was a great driver, but during turns, he would attempt to grab the steering wheel and try to yank it out of my hands and even put us out of our lane a few times. He would also randomly slam the brakes during turns too. I'm sure the guy has seen some crap, but actively trying to murder us both wasn't going to help either. Story 29. Not an examiner, but on my test as I was driving along, I see a couple of cars suddenly dart across the street right in front of me. I quickly brake, and as I'm braking, I notice a stop sign way off to the side and partially hidden by a bush. I come to a stop and my examiner says, "Oh, good eye. Most people miss that one." Had those cars not come at that exact second, I would have missed it. I can only imagine how many people have failed right there, and also how many crashes probably occur there. So, just a thought, maybe stop signs shouldn't be hidden in bushes? Like, what? That seems like a top priority for any... I don't know who would deal with that, but whoever works for the city to do those sorts of things. Story 30. Not an examiner, but a student. I was in driver's education, and we all had to test as drivers for a certain amount of hours, as well as be passengers to other testers for a certain amount of hours. I was the passenger while one of my classmates was driving. Instructor in passenger seat, me in the back. My classmate decides to run a red light, which was immediately followed by flashing train signal lights. The instructor was already panicked about the red light running incident and yelled to stop. This chick stopped on the railroad tracks even though the lights were flashing. No, there wasn't a bar that comes down for the train. I'm in the backseat trying to unbuckle my freaking seatbelt to get the hell out, and all of a sudden she floors it in reverse. Thank God, but not great. Please don't make other students be witnesses to other student drivers. I almost got hit by a freaking train that day. Luckily, there wasn't anyone behind us, and luckily, I wasn't hit by a train. Story 31. When I went for mine, my examiner checked my brake lights, headlights, etc. Then when she got in the car and we were leaving the parking lot, I noticed I had a crack along the windshield, and she said, "Oh, I'm actually not supposed to let you do the test if your window is cracked, but we've already started. I'll ignore it." I was so pumped. We also talked the whole time. Story 32. My wife failed pretty quick. She did a 3-point turn correctly, but then went back into the lane that she was originally in. Oncoming traffic. She was just nervous though, so we had to go to another DMV 2 hours away, and thank God that lady was super nice. Right off the bat, my wife was so nervous she couldn't even back out of the parking space. I instinctively helped her in my language, but the lady told me not to multiple times. Somehow, she let us pass. Story 33. My safety course instructor used to run exams, and told our class a story about an examinee who didn't safely avoid road debris, opting to straddle it and maintain high speed. Turns out it was a piece of another car's axle which had detached and was sticking up high enough that it caught the front of the test car, levered up into the bottom of the car, and stabbed through the underside and whichever pipes and lines were in the way up into the cab, right between him and the examinee. Maybe not the biggest mistake ever. Let's be honest, a lot of us probably straddle road stuff like sticks and roadkill when we're pretty confident it won't bump the underside of the car, but in this case, it almost murdered one of them. Story 34. Sort of on the other side of things, the instructor got into the manual car and I said, "Hello, sir, how are you?" His first words to me were, "Thank God you speak English." He then proceeded to go off about how awful female drivers were, and Indian female drivers in particular, and didn't know how to drive stick shift, so he was really nervous when he got into the car. I'm a white woman who passed the most uncomfortable test of her life. To answer the real question though, a friend of mine turned left on a red light because she thought the whole right on red applied to any direction. Well, where I live, you can actually turn left on a red if it's onto a one-way street, which I only realized recently isn't the case a province over. Thankfully, I haven't driven there. About the instructor, though, yikes! I don't think he should be considered an unbiased judge for anything or anyone. Story 35. I waited until I was 21 to get my license and was very anxious. In my state, we have 2 portions of the test, and you must pass both. But you could pass one and fail the other and get to retake just the one part another day. I was so nervous and had to basically come to terms with the fact that I probably wouldn't pass, but I still wanted to try. I just remember parking at the end of it, and the driving instructor looked at me and said, "You passed." My dumb butt self in shock was like, "Both?" And she tried not to laugh, but she was like, "Yes, you passed." I still remember my pure elation. Shout out to all the people brave enough out there to be driving test examiners. Story 36. After I passed my learner test, I was rather excited and decided not to drive home to avoid mistakes due to being too happy. Now, where I did my driving test, they used to send people out in high visibility vests to walk across pedestrian crossings to test the drivers for pedestrian hazards. So we pulled up behind a new provisional driver at a set of lights which had a pedestrian crossing in the left-hand side, which is where both of the new P-plater and my mother were heading. Across the street, there also happened to be a group of 3 coppers. As soon as the light had turned green, a high-visibility pedestrian walked across the crossing, which the P-plater somehow didn't see and floored the accelerator and hit the pedestrian in full view of the 3 cops. The woman hit was injured, but nothing serious. And the last I saw was that same P-plater getting a lecture from the cops on the side of the road. Story 37. Not an examiner or instructor. At the Vic Roads office where I did my test, the parking lot has a sign behind a tree that states it's 10 kilometers per hour, a snail's pace. I was told this by my instructor before the test to never go over 5 kilometers an hour to ensure I passed. They also had a stop sign just outside of the office behind a wall but with a continuous white line. So of course, unless you had an instructor, you were likely to fail. The instructor told me of many people who fail before they even leave the office, so she informed me of all of this. If it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't have passed the first time. Story 38. Not an examiner, but I made a load of horrific mistakes my first test. I hadn't had much practice actually driving on the road, and I was a bit nervous and lost. I turned right when she said to turn left, and while I was in the middle of my horrendous attempt at parallel parking, she told me don't even try, and move on to the road. I switched lanes without turning my head to actually check. But yeah, never knew my actual score, but I still passed. I'm sorry, OP, do you mean you passed this attempt? I didn't see the rest of your test, so I can't say for sure, but I feel like quite a few things went wrong here. Follow-up question, where are you? Just so I know to watch out if I'm ever there. That's a joke, by the way. OP did not do anything horrifically wrong. Just a lot of mini mistakes, it seems. Story 39. I was being examined. I went to park and I accidentally parked kinda sideways. The examiner freaked the hell out. I told her, I'm gonna fix this, and I did. She told me I passed. I got so excited I jumped out of my car, still in drive, and the examiner freaked the hell out on me. I still got my license. Story 40. Not a, quote, worst mistake, but just my test story. Test was going fine. I saw that he docked me like 1 or 2 points for who knows what. It irked me, but I also know that perfect tests don't happen here, and it couldn't have been anything too major. Then I'm doing my parallel park, and you know, I've got this crap down to a science at this point. So as I'm almost done, he says, "You're on the curb, do it again." Basically, the first time he said anything to me other than, "Turn here." I can see in my mirror there's no way I'm on the curb, nor did I feel one. I put the car in park and told him I'm not, and he says, "I am." So I said to him, "Let's go out of the car and I'll show you I'm not." At which point he responds, "This test is over, head back." So now I'm upset. We're only a minute or 2 away from the test center, so I get us there. He then turns to me and says something to the tune of, "I'm gonna pass you because I never want to be in a car with you again. But when you end up murdering someone, don't say I didn't warn you." Okay, I wasn't gonna argue. I kind of rationalized to myself that maybe this is something he says to everyone or all guys as some sort of scared straight thing. But in hindsight, I don't think there's any way he could say that regularly and not get in crap over it. Anyway, that was 16 years ago, and despite having been in 8 collisions, I haven't caused a single one. Story 41. I was actually the driver. I guess it was more embarrassing than really stupid, but here we go. Before you take your test, the examiner makes you answer a few technical questions like, where does the oil go? Or turn the headlights and stuff. Well, he told me to turn the brights on. Me, a really nervous teen, forgot where the brights were and how you turn them on. The more stupid thing was that my instructor and I actually went through all of this a few minutes ago. The sheer look of pain in the eyes of my instructor said it all. But I finally found them. I got my crap together and passed with no further problems. Also, my instructor told me that one of his students had been assigned the task to check if the brake lights worked. The dude pressed on the brake, got out, walked all the way behind the car, and then came back and said, "They're broken." The right thing to do is send the instructor to the back of the car, press the brake, and wait for a signal. Also, a girl who passed her test a week ago got her license revoked because, listen to this, she overtook a police car with blue lights on the right side of the highway, going over the speed limit because she was, quote, in a hurry. And she wanted to sue the department for it and didn't get why she was the one in the wrong. Oh, Germany, how I love you. Story 42. Obligatory, not an examiner, but I am a bus driver and was taking a group of about 50 6 to 7-year-olds to their swimming lesson, set off from traffic lights just before the road went up over a rail line and downhill on the other side of it. In the lane to my left, there is a B-double truck picking up speed, and in front of it, a Toyota Starlet. As we start to descend off the bridge, the Starlet makes a quick lane change in front of me. It's then I notice the L plates and back off. As we're approaching another set of currently green lights, the lights go orange as the 900 kg Starlet is right at them and the driver stops instantly. Fine for them, but it's here I start to panic. I'm not sure I'll have enough room to pull up 12 tons of bus from 60 kilometers per hour downhill. The truck to my left means I can't go that way, and there's another car in the turning lane to my right, so I can't move over there either. I stand on the brakes, hold on for dear life, and brace for the impact I'm certain is inevitable. All of these mental calculations happen in a split second. The school teachers are sitting up in the front and see the whole thing unfold. They brace too, but the kids are mostly unaware, and start sliding in their seats, squealing. I somehow manage to pull the bus up about 15 centimeters from the back of the Starlet in a cloud of tire smoke. There is a second of absolute silence in the bus. Then the kids start crying. The teachers curse the car driver's stupidity and start trying to calm down the kids. The B-double in the left lane has absolutely no chance of stopping, and he sails through the just gone red light. I'm shaking like a leaf. My heart is pounding. I happen to look down into the car and see the yellow safety vest of the driving examiner and the clipboard he's using to mark the driver. This explains the sudden lane change and the hard stop of the light changing. But clearly, no one looked in the rearview mirrors before that entire sequence began. I see the examiner mark something on the sheet in his lap. I'm so close to them I can read the bold heading on the sheet. Once the light went green, they moved off as if nothing happened. I have no idea if either the driver or examiner realized just how close to being wiped out they came that day, but my hands were still shaking when I finally pulled up at the pool. The teachers checked on me and commended my driving, but I only had a few minutes to gather myself before I had to pick up the group that were returning to school and set off again. The next day, I was back at the same school, still on the swimming program, when the principal comes out to inform me they're going to make a formal complaint about my, quote, dangerous driving to my manager. Obviously, the kids went home and told their parents, "We almost had a smash." So the parents called the school to complain. I asked the principal if he'd spoken to the teachers on board at the time, and he admitted that he hadn't. So I suggested he do that first and find out what actually happened before he goes any further. The teachers let me know later on that they told him exactly what happened. So he never did make that complaint, but he never apologized to me either. Story 43. Answering from my dad, Canada, mid-80s. A friend of his went for a driving test upon arriving in Canada. When the instructor said, "Next U-turn right," he took the U-turn almost immediately into the oncoming traffic in the fast lane. The instructor's comment when he asked if he passed at the end of the test went something like this: "I don't know if you have a family, but I do. So the next time you take a test, you better have another examiner." That last line goes unnecessarily hard. I'm sure that instructor was afeared for his freaking life, though. I can only imagine you turning into oncoming traffic and just being like, well, this is how it ends. Story 44. I was actually an examiner. In my training month, one of the first guys I ever took came into the city from the country. He did everything possible wrong, but very confidently. He confidently drove the wrong way. He confidently turned in front of oncoming traffic, ran the whole gamut of mistakes. But the biggest was at the end. While I'm explaining his test with my trainer in the car, he pulls out his wallet and tries to hand me a $20 bill. It was a bribe. It was a freaking bribe. I shot him down and explained that bribing someone who works for the government was a big deal. Like, a big deal. He didn't seem to understand and thought it was cool. Banned from retesting for 6 months. Story 45. This is really close to being completely unrelated, but I decided on a whim one day to test drive a new car. Keep in mind, no way in hell I could ever afford it. I was a boot PFC still in the first weeks of my A-school training, and this was a Honda S2000. I mean, yeah, I could probably have paid for it eventually, maybe by the time I retired, and I imagine the only reason they let me do it was because a military paycheck is basically guaranteed, but anyway, I had zero intention of actually buying the thing. I just wanted to know what it felt like to drive a sports car. So I get in the driver's seat and the salesman gets on the passenger side, and I turn it on, rev the engine a couple of times, put it in first, and take off. Right over the concrete bumps that divide the parking space from the one in front of it, and the one that divided that one from the one in front of it as well. Ka-chunk, ka-chunk. I don't know if things were higher than usual or if the car was just really low to the ground, but it got stuck. Some people had to come out and push the car down to get the wheels to touch so it could be driven off. Needless to say, they didn't even let me do the pushing, much less the driving at that point. The salesman was horrified. I can clearly remember his face more than 20 years later. They didn't charge me anything though, which amazes me to this day. That was the only time I ever test drove a vehicle, and I only made it about 3 feet. Just to throw in something a little more topical, when I was taking driver's ed, we would have 3 students in the car with the instructor. And once I was a passenger while this really nervous girl was driving, and the instructor had to use his brake pedal. She almost got onto a highway going the wrong way. Like, as she began to do it, he was saying, this is the wrong way. Hold on. You're going onto the highway. Stop what you're doing. Hey, stop. You're going in the wrong way. What the hell is wrong with you? Stop the damn car. She just kept getting more and more nervous and flustered and freaked out, which for some reason caused her to just keep pressing the gas. It was actually a really good learning experience for me. I've always driven imagining that every other driver is just like that, just white knuckle making it up as they go, overcommitting to mistakes and such. These kinds of things are why you'll see a vehicle come to a complete stop on the interstate and go into reverse across 4 lanes of traffic to get to the exit they missed. Story 46. As I was waiting to take my exam, my driving instructor told me this story. A while back, he had a student who he was waiting with in the car to take her exam. The examiner finally steps in to start the exam. He then asks her, "What's the first thing anyone should do once entering a car?" She then proceeds to start the car without his instruction. He then asks her several more times while even giving a proper motion on what she should do first, and she was completely lost. She failed the test before she even started because she didn't put on her seatbelt. Story 47. Not a mistake, though my instructor had a good laugh during my examination. We had the option to have your instructor drive back seat during our exam, which I took advantage of because nerves. I was about 22 at the time, and as the stereotype goes, guys know and love cars. Well, this guy doesn't. You either point at a car and mention its color, or we're gonna have a problem. So as we entered the car park to get to the car, the examiner started with a little eye test. Could you tell me the license plate of X brand car? As you can guess, I couldn't answer that question. Examiner looked at me like, oh god, he's half blind. While my instructor ended up in a laughing fit, he informed her about my disability and told me the color. It was the odd one out. After which I answered her question. Whole exam ended up being the examiner calling out what roads to take or which cars to follow, always by brand name, after which my instructor mentioned the color of said car from the back seat. I passed on the first try, but I did get the question of how I couldn't even name the most basic of brands or car types. That must be something that people who have been driving for a while or been around cars more just don't realize. If you haven't been driving, you don't really have a need to know car brands. As I've driven more and more, I've learned them. But if when I started, on my learner's test or whatever, no way. Story 48. My examiner had a bunch of kids in his car, 16 and 17 or so, and struck up a conversation with this homeless guy in the middle of nowhere. We were on a break and switching examinees. Anyway, the homeless guy leaves for some reason and leaves behind a bunch of magazines. The examiner then grabs the magazines and throws them in the back of his car. They were adult content, but not 70s gaudy stuff. It was the weirdest Japanese crap you could imagine. Lucky for us, we didn't have to imagine. Me and this girl took turns in the back seat and would look at it reluctantly like a naked old man in the street. There was a whole page of a Japanese girl with an octopus inside of her. The guy saw us and he took them and didn't throw them away, just put them in his trunk. Story 49. I was the driver in this case. The examiner told me to get in the car and show her that my turning signals and brake lights worked. She went to the back of the vehicle and signaled to me what to do. When she got to the brake light signal, I panicked and put the car into reverse to make sure the lights showed. I let my foot off the brake and started rolling back towards her, and when the lady yelled, I stopped. We proceeded with the test and I pulled out into oncoming traffic twice. She yelled at me and grabbed the oh crap handle. I only made it around the block before she told me to take the next turn back where we started. Yeah, I failed. Story 50. I nearly did a burnout in the testing car because I was used to a very old Datsun 180B, which had about enough horsepower where my air conditioner isn't quite as powerful. Testing car was a new Toyota, and being entirely used to literally flooring it to struggle my way to 100 kilometers per hour, did that, and the car decided it was gonna spin and freaking go. Got away with it because I was used to a car older than the examiner, and that seemed like fair reasoning. Also nearly threw my face into the steering wheel because the brakes were 50 times better. Story 51. Was a first-time test taker. Passed no issues and got my paper-printed license. Went home and quickly celebrated with my parents, and then my newfound freedom decided to drive to a friend's house to help install hardwood floors. I didn't care what it was, I just wanted to drive by myself somewhere. I had to swing by a store on the way, which required a left-hand turn at the worst intersection in our city. Unprotected left turn with oncoming traffic coming uphill around a turn that effectively left it blind until right before the light. Being a nervous driver, again, literally had my license printed out 2 hours ago, I went into the intersection on a green and waited for the light to change, legally allowing me to finish my turn as I was already in the intersection. As I did, some idiot in a truck, I was in my glorious '89 Toyota Camry, comes screaming up the hill, blows through the red, and slams right into the front of my car. Fortunately, he only clipped the front quarter of the car, totaling it but leaving me unscathed. Unfortunately, when the police arrived in my shaken up state, I made my story sound like I turned before the light was red, when in fact I'd entered the intersection before the light was red. They let the other driver stand next to me while I gave my story, and of course, he agreed wholeheartedly with what I said, which rendered me at fault. Fortunately, there were several witnesses that came forward later, saying he, without a doubt, ran the red. Shout out to those witnesses, saving your butt from yourself, OP. I get it though, you're all shaken up. You don't really know how to say things in the right way, and so you say them in the wrong way. Story 52. The driver here took a month lesson. It was me, another driving student to switch with if things became too stressful, and the instructor in the front seat. Was driving for the first time with an instructor. He told me to turn left on the street, and I did, but into oncoming traffic. My brain died. He just casually turned the wheel into the correct lane while talking about pizza, and he had me pull into a pizza place, bought us a pizza, and asked me to switch with the other girl in the car. I barely passed the driver's school. Haven't taken the actual test yet years later, though. I'm terrified. Story 53. Story of my friend. In our country, there's a law that you cannot overtake on a bridge. So him and the examiner are going on the test and get onto a bridge, and as luck would have it, there is a truck broken down on the bridge. Examiner asks him to go around the truck and overtake it, and my friend says, "Ha, you want me to break the law so you can fail me in your dreams?" My friend was really determined to pass on his road test, and rest assured, he didn't. Story 54. Ex-examiner here, Australia. Student pulled in front of a car doing 50 kilometers an hour in a roundabout. After I intervened to avoid a collision, the student turns to me and said the other car should have given way. Yeah, big no. Had another one with the rally car mentality and was following another car so closely I couldn't see the other car's plates. After about 5 years, I was the only examiner not involved with any major collisions. Story 55. Took the test in Spain. Don't really speak such great Spanish and the bureaucracy is enormous for everything. Test went fairly well until the examiner asked me to park. It was on a busy urban road and you could only stop for unloading. 2 huge trucks were already unloading and he was asking me to park between them. This is illegal, by the way. I get so nervous wondering if this is a trick question, I damn near hit the wheel of one of the trucks. The guy gets out without saying a word, comes back about 25 minutes later with 3 supermarket bags of stuff, and turns out he just wanted to go shopping. We drove back to the center and he proceeded to detail the minor errors and almost errors I committed, or almost committed as if nothing weird just happened. But hey, I passed. Story 56. Driver here. Had been driving for 10 years before I took my test in America, so the concept of stop signs was new to me still. The examiner was a lady. Ran the first stop sign. The examiner says, "Careful." Ran the second stop sign. "If you do it one more time, I will fail you." Okay, sorry, I won't. Then I passed. I didn't think running stop signs was a 3 strikes you're out sort of thing. What do you mean you passed? Like, not to be rude, but really? Story 58. I was taking a truck driving test with a company I was trying to get a job with. I had passed the test, and the tester told me to back the truck into its parking spot. When I did, I hit a support wire for a power pole, which snapped, sprung up, and hit a power transformer. It knocked out power for 10 square blocks. I just handed him the keys and started to walk away, but he called me back and said no big deal. That should have been a red flag, but I was desperate at the time. I ended up quitting several months later because my co-driver was smoking crack in the sleeper. Story 59. I received my Class A CDL without performing a single successful downshift during the test. Examiner said I should, quote, "work on that." When training school bus drivers, in addition to CDL knowledge and driving skill, I gave pointers on local traffic hazards. One of my students failed his test for speeding, but he told the examiner I said it was okay because you never see cops on that road. Story 60. Not a mistake, but the thread reminded me of this. When I was 16, I took my driving test and had an extremely large man as my instructor. I was also an extremely large teen, crammed into my grandmother's Toyota Breeze, which was the only car I had access to. After struggling to get into the car for several minutes, he gets in and I say, "Good morning." And he says, "I'm not here to talk. Put the car and drive." Immediately, my anxiety is 11 out of 10. I had heard from so many people that their road tests took a few minutes. Mine felt like an eternity, and according to my waiting grandmother, it was around half an hour. She was getting worried something happened to us. Dude drove me through a school zone at 7:30 a.m., had me parallel park behind a school bus. All my friends told me they had never even had to parallel park on their tests, and while we're approaching the starting area, I come to a 4-way stop. I wait, complete stop, and go. He throws his clipboard up and starts screaming at me that a car is coming and I put his life in danger. Tells me to pull over. The test site is maybe a block away with my waiting grandmother, and gets out of the car, leans in the window, and he says, "Good luck trying to ever get a license and get a haircut," and starts writing crap down. I flip out at this point and start screaming back. He tells me I'll never get a license in New York and keeps writing crap down. I didn't get behind the wheel of a car again for 7 years. Took my road test at 24:25 and passed, and it literally took 5 minutes. I barely had to do anything besides drive away and drive back. What exactly is tested in a 5-minute driving test? Where I'm from, the driving tests are very strictly mandated on time. It's like you have this much time that you have to fill and you just drive for that amount. So being stopped at a red light is a blessing actually on my driving tests. You just get to run out the clock. Story 61. Non-examiner, but in the UK where I took my test, there were a few parts they would try to catch you out on, saying take the next right, to make you indicate early and fail because it would look like you're going to turn into the petrol station instead of the road. This didn't fool me on my test, but 2 weeks later the same examiner on my friend's test indicated early and failed. Enough points and early indications to make it a fail. I passed with only one minor, by the way. It was for trying to pull away in second gear, which I did just fine, but wasn't exactly healthy on the engine. Story 62. I failed my first driver's exam. Everything starts out like normal. Guy does an external exam of the car and then gets in. Tells me to start driving. However, I notice he hasn't buckled up. Click it or ticket state, New Jersey. Joke's on him, I was ready for this trick. Sorry, I can't drive without you having buckled up your seatbelt. Just drive. I'm sorry, but the laws say all passengers must be buckled. Drive or I will fail you. Sorry, I really can't do that if you aren't buckled. He wrote something on his clipboard, gave me back my permit, and told me I could sign up again to take the exam, but not for 2 weeks. Tried to protest it to the woman when rescheduling, but nothing came of it. Okay, this is the most infuriating thing yet. What do you mean? He just failed you on the spot. You can't do that. You have to be buckled. What? I don't get it. You are a driving instructor. Do better. Not you, OP, the other guy. Story 63. Test taker here. I failed my first test on a few minor technicalities. Found out afterwards that I shouldn't have actually failed, but the tester was just a jerk. And I was pretty non-confrontational, so I didn't contest it, but that's not the story. My second attempt at my test went brilliantly. A note here and there for speeding, only 1 kilometer an hour over the speed limit twice, but otherwise really well. Got back to the center, filled in the rest of the paperwork, paid for my license, got my probationary plates for my vehicle, and got in my car to drive back home. Immediately after turning off the side road that the test center was on, I ran a red light while doing a right-hand turn, and just barely avoided an accident with 2 cars and proceeded to stall in the middle of the busy intersection. All of this was about 20 meters from the test center that had just passed me. Yeah, the whole drive home, I was expecting them to come after me and revoke my license on the spot. Story 64. I used to work for a trucking outfit, so as a formality, everyone had to be retested in one of our trucks to get hired. It was a formality, so whoever wasn't busy around the office took the new guy out for a tool. Our city is built on either side of a deep river gorge, so there's a steep downhill bank, a long bridge, and then a steep uphill climb, with, just to screw with you, a traffic light at both ends. This is a little tricky with 18 gears, but since you have to do it literally every day, we always take the new drivers on this route to see how bad they grind the gears. So I was out with this new guy, and we go down the hill, across the bridge, and up the hill. The light turns red, and he's a little hesitant. But we're empty and going uphill, so he puts it in the clutch, takes the truck out of gear, and rides the brakes for a bit. We stop, the light turns green, he takes his foot off the brake, but he forgot to put the truck back into gear. So now we're rolling backwards, just a little bit, and he mashed the brakes again. But he can't get the truck into gear with his foot on the brake, so he takes his foot off of the pedal, and for a second after But he can't get the truck into gear with his foot on the brake, so he takes his foot off the pedal, and for a second after interminable second, he tries to get the truck in gear, which he can't because the transmission is spinning backward because we're rolling back down the hill in traffic. I reached out and pulled the air brake. I don't think we rolled more than a couple of feet, but the way the cab shook when the brakes slammed on, I felt confident in my decision. The cars went around us. He eventually found his gear, and I don't think he left second for the rest of the tour. Story 65. My mother has been working as an examiner for 15 plus years, supporting her family by herself, God bless her. My favorite story involves a young 18-year-old woman in her parents' brand new, fully loaded Lincoln SUV. During the test, my mother motioned and told the lady to parallel park along the side of the road, which she attempted, and hit the curb with her back right tire. Fine, you'd say normally. Let's just pull out and try again, right? Nope. She hit the gas and proceeded to jump the curb, and she didn't stop. She somehow proceeded to stick the back right axle of the SUV on top of a fire hydrant and was completely immobilized. Cops and tow trucks had to come. Sadly, like all teenagers, attempted to plead to my mother, "Please don't fail me." Story 66. When I took my test, I had driven my brother's car to the testing center. Mom met me there, signed what she needed to, and went to work. The trooper and I drove the designated course and parked back at the office. She said, "Well, Mr. Slevin, you didn't pass. Come back next week and try again." I think I sped. She then got out of the car. I put it in reverse, backed up, and drove to school. Story 67. My brother failed his first test because the instructor's car had a bulb out and he had no spare on hand. There were 3 bulbs in the brake light fitting, 2 of which worked. Still wouldn't let him drive. Even worse, the instructor got so mad at the examiner, he wound up with a warning from the driving school for threatening behavior. Glad it wasn't my test. Story 68. I'm not an examiner, but my driver ed instructor likes to tell this story. There was once a student who was doing everything perfectly, but in the hill parking section, he managed to park pretty much perpendicular to the curb. My driver ed instructor even asked the student if they were sure they finished when he got a confident yes. Needless to say, the student did not pass. Story 69. Examinee here. Was told I wasn't the only one to do this, so yeah. Went to take my exam and was getting along well enough. Stopped smoothly in a long line of cars. But I was practically crapping bricks with how anxious I was. Even now I still have driving anxiety 4 years after passing. So imagine when I was being hardcore judged after starting to drive a year ago. Anyway, I didn't have my glasses and things were pretty fuzzy. Saw a gap between cars and thought it was a lane nobody was in, and it wasn't. Now, luckily I realized this before I fully committed, but even starting that motion is totally obvious. I received a panicked warning about sliding between the cars. OP, if you can't see that well, you have to wear glasses when you drive. What? Why did you not wear Sorry, I just don't get it. Is that not illegal where you live? Story 70. I'm not a tester, but when I did my exam, I had 2 examiners. One was learning and the other supervising. I'm not sure what happened, but I came to a T intersection and they weren't telling me which way to go, so I decided to turn left. Halfway through my turn, the examiner pipes up and asks me to turn right. I nearly ended up hitting a car in order to do it because I was so freaked out and confused. I passed, but they got told off by my instructor and probably their supervisor when we got back. Story 71. Non-examiner, but I have a good one from when I was taking driver's training. We were on our first highway drive and I was in a group with another kid who I had never met, and he seemed extremely nervous, so from the start, I had a bad feeling. So we pull out and everything starts out fine, but then we get to the highway and the kid refuses to drive over 45 miles per hour. The limit is 70. So after a minute or so, the instructor says something along the lines of, "Hey man, I know this can be a tough drive and you might be a little nervous, but you gotta go faster. You don't have to get up to 70, just go 60. But really, a little faster." I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like that. Really nice, genuine, and definitely a lot better than what I would have said. But then, out of nowhere, the kid slams on the brakes, completely stops, yes, in the middle of the highway, and starts screaming at the instructor, telling him, "I was going fast enough," and to stop yelling at me. The instructor looked at the kid and said, "Get out," and looked at me and said, "You're up," and didn't acknowledge the kid for the rest of the ride. I didn't see him in the class ever again. Story 72. Screwed up big time. Well, sorta. Not an examiner, but hear this. 3rd time visiting far-off testing center while stitching class with my friend who was generous with his time and car. 3rd time, lady finds another technical issue to have me reschedule. Friend gets upset. He drives off the parking lot with wheels screeching and people running out of the way like a King Kong clip. Fast forward next week back to the same DMV, examiner walks up and says, "Hey, wasn't that you guys driving recklessly through the parking lot?" Then went off on me. I was the passenger, by the way. Then failed me on a technicality. So embarrassed, still cringe thinking about that moment. Story 73. My brother's in the 80s. DUI license suspension then turned into expired license due to my brother joining the Marines. So he gets out, and then he has to get his permit and do the whole thing over again. But because he has a special DUI called a DWI in New York license thing, he has to go to a special DMV testing area in Albany, the state capital. So he, of course, just drives down there on his permit, alone. Instructor comes out and says, "Where's your license, driver?" And my brother just shrugs. Instructor, exasperated, says, "Get in the car," drives around the block and says, "Well, you know how to drive, take me back." Passed. During the 80s, states were still trying to figure out how DUI in other states worked and complied with their laws, hence the nonsense about special DMV instructors 2 hours away from where you live. It's since been figured out that extra steps aren't necessary anymore, I don't think. Story 74. So my driving instructor once had a lovely young man turn up for his test and all was going fine. Eventually, they came off a slip road onto a dual carriageway and were doing 70 miles per hour. Then suddenly, said student projectile vomits all over himself and the wheel and the chair, etc., while my poor instructor is trying to get him to slow down and pull onto the hard shoulder. Instant fail. Turns out he was still hung over and possibly still drunk. My instructor phoned the driving center, told them what happened, got the rest of the day off, and made the student drive him to the deep cleaners. Apparently, the student just kind of made his way home covered in sick. Story 75. Not an examiner. This was my dad's story. He's in his 80s and had some fender benders and mild cognitive issues, so our family contacted his doctor and demanded, without his knowing, that the doctor request a driving exam, which he did. Hooray for that doctor. Dad studied the books for a couple months and passed the written exam with flying colors, got in the car for the driving part, and promptly turned the wrong way down a one-way street in a town he's lived in for 65 years. When the examiner freaked out, Dad harumphed and did a 5-point U-turn in the middle of the road as cars waited. No, he didn't pass. We thought that was the end of it, so we got him hooked up with Uber so he could continue to go to the gym, shopping, etc. Did he do that? No. He secretly took Uber to a driving school and petitioned the DMV to give him another chance, which they did. Boo, DMV. Thankfully, he sat at a green light for a bit trying to recall left from right, so he was told that was his last chance. He's now the king of Uber and no longer talks about driving. On a somewhat serious note, I can understand how much it would suck to lose that aspect of your independence. Not being able to drive your way around would suck after driving your whole life. Like, there's no other way to say it. So I get it. At the same time, you do eventually just become a liability on the road, and that's not safe for anyone. Story 76. My friend failed his test the first time he took it. His mistake wasn't that bad, but it's a really funny story. So he gets in, buckles up, and starts pulling out of the lot. But he hits a curb, and the instructor tells him to pull back in because he automatically failed. My friend goes, "Oh, what the hell do you mean?" And the instructor says, you can't swear either. Naturally, my buddy cusses one last time as he pulls in, and a shaken instructor quickly hops out and jogs inside. Just to allay any confusion, hell was not the original word this story said. Story 77. The setting to this story. I was 12 with my dad and 15-year-old brother and cousin. My dad had decided to teach my cousin how to drive. My brother was joining them, and I thought I might join as well. Before this, my cousin said he had some experience when his uncle taught him in Mexico, but it didn't seem likely that he had taught him much. First error. When he was pulling out of the driveway, a car was coming. It was right in front of us when he finished backing out. Instead of just realigning with the road, he backed up and tried doing it like that. After a while, the person had had enough and moved past us by moving to our right side lane. We questioned if we could even trust him. Error 2. While quote-unquote driving, he kept swerving and could hardly stay in his own lane. And error 3, every time he turned left, he would clip into the left side lane. We decided on going straight every time we saw a car. We somehow still trusted him and we fixed some issues. We decided to work on it the following day. The worst part is that the day previous, my dad tried teaching me as well, and my brother and father said they trusted me more. But now he drives fine and we trust him more than the first time. But yeah. Story 78. Not the examiner, but the test taker. Going smoothly until a bird flew into my windshield out of nowhere and died immediately. 16-year-old me stopped and got out of the car and checked. The examiner said she could have failed me because I got out of the car without turning it off. Kind of important. Anyway, she said it was really nice of me to check on it and that I didn't swerve and kept calm when it hit the car, so she just said it never happened in her book. 79. I somehow failed my driver's test right when I started it. The weather was terrible because it was snowing hard, but this was Montana, so everyone lives on with their day and still drives like it's nothing. I was backing out of my parking spot and looking both ways and watching for traffic. I pull out when it was clear, and the driver instructor tells me she needs me to turn right at the stop sign ahead, and she'll tell me later. I asked her why, and she said she will tell me later. She tells me to turn right at every stop sign I come to, and I use my turn signals and even look both ways, doing everything I'm supposed to on the test. Then we're back at the DMV and she has me pull in front of it. I do, and then she starts explaining, and she also explains it to my dad. To this day, I still don't understand how I failed the test, but she said something about a pickup truck. But she said the weather was terrible and the traffic was bad, and to come back when the roads are more cleared. Story 80. Not an instructor, but I ride with a motorcycle instructor. He tells me a lot of people doing their test come into the center on their own bike, so automatic fail. A lot of people usually make their main mistakes right at the very beginning of their assessment too, when you first pull out of the car park ready for your test. Usually flustered or excited and thinking too much. Forget to indicate or look both ways, / check mirrors, etc. Story 81. Not an examiner, but when my friend was getting examined, there was a guy on the same exam date that we kinda knew. When you get examined in my country, if they tell you to get off before you finish the whole test, you know you failed. So the guy goes into the car, the examiner tells him to start, and the guy does a 180-degree turn on a one-way road. Before he even finished it, the examiner said, that's fine. You can get off now. Thank you for your time. The thing is that the guy went to autopilot mode because he was a good driver. He just choked it on the day. Well, I don't know if you can be considered like a great driver if your autopilot response is to do a 180-degree turn on a one-way road, but alright, if you insist, OP. Story 82. So, this was me. Not my proudest moment. I was terrified because my dad taught me to drive and he was a military pilot for a long time. So he did so by screaming at me and making me feel very anxious. Anyway, I get to the test and I'm careful to do everything flawlessly, but I'm still waiting for the examiner to scream at me / be equally disappointed. I'm following her instructions carefully and I'm probably about 90% through the test when she visibly relaxes and says, "You're a very smooth driver. You're doing great." And so I also relax. She tells me to head back and starts writing a lot, stops watching the road. I go to turn left and I'm walking on sunshine as I signal and glide smoothly through the turn after I complete my stop. Everything is great. Or was great, until the examiner looked up from her clipboard and began screaming and pointing in horror. I was so caught up in not failing that I missed the sign indicating the road I had just turned onto was a one-way street. Guess who just went the wrong way? The funny thing is, I knew I failed in that moment, so there were no more craps to be given. I calmly pulled over, turned around without reacting too much to her terror. Story 83. I wasn't the examiner, I just wanted to share my DMV story. On my third try at 19 years old, I got the best instructor ever. It was his last day and he was retiring, and I was his final test. As I was in the car demonstrating that my blinkers and equipment worked properly before even testing, he turned to my mom with a crap-eating grin and said, "He passed." Took my test. Things went nice and calmly, made no major mistakes. I would have passed even if my instructor wasn't in such a great mood. Was fun. Story 84. Motorbike rider here. Failed my test the first time. Doing fine, poodling around. Examiner behind me with radio telling me what to do. Get to emergency stop part. He says, "Okay, pull over here," because he's going to explain how emergency stop will work. I pull over, get off the bike, turn around to face instructor and hear the bike fall over behind me. The kickstand wasn't down. Immediate fail. Story 85. On my first and only test attempt, I ran the first stop sign in the parking lot of the test facility. "You know there was a stop sign there?" he asked. I exclaimed in horror to the man supervising me that I didn't know parking lots had stop signs. He frowned and remained quiet the whole test. The remainder of my test of driving around the town went perfectly, and for some reason the supervisor passed me on that try. To this day, I don't know if I deserved it, but 10 years in, I've never been in an accident or gotten more than a parking ticket, so I must be doing something right. Story 86. I have this student who keeps flooring it every time we take a test. I've been hospitalized on several occasions because of this, imprisoned because of his actions under my watch, and endangered many others. I've tried cheating my way out by giving him extra credit, but then I realized I would be endangering the many citizens of the city. One time, while in prison, he tried busting me out because of whatever reason. Surprisingly, the guards never saw them. Once he almost passed the test, but because I was on probation and the test took place out of my limits, his license was shred to pieces by the police. I'm out of jail and back to teaching at my school. I can hear the dreadful noise of his squeaky shoes and his horrid voice as he chants, "I'm ready," over and over again. Pray to Neptune I'm still alive after this. I thought this was a kind of funny joke one and a good one to end on, so that's that. But I gotta be honest, if I read "I'm not an examiner" one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind. Like, it is a niche question, I'll give it that. But the amount of people, I don't think I've ever seen more who've been like, "I'm not a blank." Anyway, yeah, all the stories for today. I would like to thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.